popcorn junkies, how are you? This is the top 10 films of 2025, plus a little list at the end of some pleasant surprises. Now, the rules and regulations around what goes in 2025 are quite simple for us. It's whatever film was released in the UK in 2025. Now, for some of our American followers and watchers, for people from other parts of the world, you might be like, The Brutalist, Nosferatu, that was all way back in 2024. Well, in America and other parts of the world, they will have been released earlier in 2024. But here in the UK, yes, they came out in 2025. So when you reach back to some of the first films we saw in the UK and that we reviewed, you're like, oh my God, Nosferatu, Baby Girl, the Nicole Kidman film, things like that, all the craze that there was around those films. It seems like, my God, that seems like a very 2024 thing. Well, it was for many of you in the world, but it wasn't for us in the UK. So this is strictly films that have been released in 2025 and that we managed, or I managed to see. At the end of this top 10, I'm also going to talk about some notable mentions, some pleasant surprises, films that perhaps didn't make the top 10 but were impressive or kind of opened our eyes or made us go, oh wow, that was kind of tasty. We quite like that. Separately, we'll also be doing the worst films of 2025 and some notable disappointments in there too. So without further ado, let's have a look at the top 10 films of 2025. Okay, so coming in at number 10, this is so not the kind of film I would normally put in my top 10 films, but I was, one of the judgments of whether a film is good or not isn't, you can't compare all films like for like. You can't compare, say, I don't know, Superman or Fantastic Four with something like Marty Supreme or Sorry Baby. They're completely different types of film. But when you judge a film, or when you score a film, or when you rate a film, or when you review a film, I think the review or the rating or what you kind of award it is relative to what they were trying to do. What was, in its own terms, has a film succeeded in its own terms? And in its own terms can be very different for very different things. For example, I would argue that something like The Housemaid was a very successful film in its own terms of being a sort of chuck-away B-movie, chintzy, kitschy, straight to streaming eventually type sort of thriller. So number 10 is The Ballad of Wallace Island. I know, a quintessentially British, almost a local hero style, quaint, gentle, blisteringly funny, very well acted, starring Tom Basden, Tim Key and Kerry Mulligan, about a very lonely man on an island who books a kind of disbanded folk duo who used to be romantically involved. They no longer are. He wants them for their own private gig. It teeters on the edges of creepy. It talks to the idea of loneliness and belonging, of unthwarted and unrealised dreams and ambitions, connections. I just thought it was absolutely charming. And in terms of the surprise factor, I sat down thinking I knew exactly what I was going to get from this British movie. And it charmed me, it surprised me, it made me laugh. And I marvelled at it. And it's one of those films I know I will be recommending to the family to watch when and if we ever all sit down in front of the television going, is there anything that we should maybe catch up on? And I'll be like, yes, The Ballad of Wallace Island. I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. Number 9 is Superman. Yes, we have a superhero in there. And this is a big deal for me because Superman is probably one of my least favourite superheroes of all time. Henry Cavill, Christopher Reeve, yes, I liked him and his story, his personal story is remarkable. The documentary about his life was just incredibly moving. He defined the first ever Superman, but as a superhero, I've always found Superman a bit naff. I found the Henry Cavill iteration just boring and dull and dry. But this I found great, and it was encouraging because this was directed by James Gunn. David Corenswet played the new Caped Crusader. No, he's not the Caped Crusader. That's Batman, isn't it? Anyway, he played the new Superman. And of course, I think you will, if you've seen our review, we were particularly smitten with its willingness to teeter into global politics with a not obvious or specific reference out to, but an acknowledgement of the sort of, if you like, the instincts and tendencies around genocidal, maniacal nations. What I'm saying is it felt like a very strong metaphor for the situation going on in Palestine. That's not the only reason we liked it. I thought it was tight. I thought it was neat. I thought it brought back into superhero films that idea of sort of, escapism and positivity, and how hope and warmth and kindness and a desire to help others can be something that in and of itself isn't necessarily naff. To quote James Gunn, does that mean being kind can be the new kind of punk rock? I think maybe it can. And I thought Superman was incredibly efficient at that. And as the superhero film really hits the buffers and is falling apart, check out my worst films for things like Fantastic Four. I thought this Superman was a kind of breath of fresh air within what's becoming increasingly very tired and very predictable and overly and unnecessarily complicated genre. Number 8. Wow, I can't believe I'm saying this. Wes Anderson's The Phoenician Scheme. I've tired of Wes Anderson in recent years. I found almost every one of his films has become a bit of a reversion of his previous film. And that's not to say that he doesn't have his own style, his own sort of, not just style in terms of look, but his own style of script, dialogue, story arc, graphics, characterization, character arcs, all that kind of stuff. But I think what made this film stand out a little bit for me were the performances of both Benicio del Toro, who I thought brought a warmth and a surrealism and humour to this that was less him being a sort of warm prop, if you like, which I sometimes worry that the actors in a Wes Anderson film amount to nothing more than warm props. I thought he brought warmth to the role, and that warmth was helped by the connection he had to have with Mia Threepleton, who is Kate Winslet's daughter, interestingly, who I thought matched Benicio del Toro magnificently. There was some stellar support: Michael Cera, Riz Ahmed, Tom Hanks, Bryan Cranston. The other kind of big kind of litmus test for me with a Wes Anderson is I haven't laughed in one of the Wes Anderson film in years, not out loud. And this film made me laugh out loud. Just the basketball scene, shooting a hoop with Riz, Bryan Cranston, Tom Hanks and Benicio, it was just sensational. And so for me, The Phoenician Scheme was a return to form. I don't know, it just had the right elements in terms of casting. And in fact, it was all the parts that were tugging against a classic Wes Anderson that made it stand out for me this year. Number 7, another British film. And when I say British like that, it's not that one doesn't like British films, but more often than not, most British films aren't particularly cinematic. And I have to confess, there's a strong argument to say that this film isn't particularly cinematic, but it was an incredibly entertaining, informative, instructive, moving, and funny, laugh out loud funny portrait. I Swear. This was the film about Tourette syndrome, profiling the real-life story of John Davidson as he comes from his working-class roots, struggles with diagnosis, is considered to be a bad egg at school, is thrown out of school, thrown out of work. He basically couples up with Peter Mullen, who's a sort of caretaker. Maxine Peake's in there as the sort of almost adoptive kind of mother, foster mother almost. And really at the centre of it is Robert Aramayo, who you might know from Lord of the Rings, who I found was absolutely staggering. Moments that stand out for me in this film in a portrait of Tourette's, which I think this film wasn't afraid to do two things. Run at the clearly emotional strife and trauma that comes with both having Tourette's, but also being a family around that person and people around that person, but also the genuine inherent humour and funniness of having it, and how it's about what can sometimes trigger it is anxiety and stress and a knowledge that you shouldn't say things in certain situations. But a kind of standout moment in the film for me was the moment where Robert Aramayo, who is the actor who doesn't have Tourette's, is playing a character who does have Tourette's, sits in a car and has a conversation with a real sufferer with Tourette's. And they clearly, I presume, are riffing and ad-libbing and insulting, and she's genuinely ticking, he's acting ticking, but you couldn't tell the difference. It was funny, it was warm, it was entertaining, it was thought-provoking. And there was a wonderful moment towards the end of the film when some new technology allowed him to have some kind of silence so that he didn't feel the need to suddenly sort of blurt out sound in a library. So it knew how to be, it was sentimental without being saccharine and without being gloopy. And I just thought a really entertaining arresting, thought-provoking movie, I swear. Number 6, this is a film that I didn't review on the channel. This is a film that I caught over the festive period. This is a film called Train Dreams. Now, this is based on a book that I've read by Dennis Johnson. It's about loggers. It's about lumbermen back in the late 1900s. It stars Joel Edgerton as Robert Granier, who in Idaho is a logger, and it charts his life. This is directed by Clint Bentley, who directed the prison set film Sing Sing about an acting troupe, a theatrical group run by Coleman Domingo. It was a big sort of contender in the Oscars last year. We loved that film. This is another incredibly contemplative, beautifully shot, gentle, immersive, almost symphonic film about a man. We follow a man across his life, him being on the logging, going away for great periods of time, chopping down trees, seeing the landscape of America, returning back, building a home, falling in love with a woman that he marries, played by Felicity Jones, having a family, creating a barn in the woods, heading off. It's seasonal. And the reason I like this is Joel Edgerton is an actor who hasn't really fired up for me in anything I've seen him in. I know he's good, he's a workmanlike actor, but for me, this was Joel Edgerton's absolute moment. I feel he should be nominated for an Oscar for this. He managed to take us into the sort of masculine, inexpressive masculine interior chambers of hope, of obligation, of being responsible and going out and working, trying to do the best for his family, and then tragic, spoiler, a moment where something quite catastrophic, you think happens to his family. You see a man broken by grief and living the rest of his life in hope. But you also get to experience his relationships with the transitory relationships that he has with other men in the group, and how other men in the logging teams that he meets or intercepts on jobs around the country, some of them come and go, some die, some lose their minds. Racism and the oppression of black people is touched upon in part in certain sections. The brutality and the harshness of being a working class lumberman in America. Yes, we know that America destroyed the Native American Indians, landscape and livelihood, but also there were just men who had no choice. These were men who'd been ostracized from somewhere else. They were the ultimate kind of migrants. They were the unwanted and the unwashed of Europe, if you like. I found it incredibly moving. It is, if there's a word of caution, it's quite depressing, but it was quite soothing as well, because we had quite an emotional Christmas. And in a weird way, sometimes watching something that you might think, God, that could make you suicidal, it was actually quite a neat, cathartic antidote. So that's Train Dreams. Which brings us into the top 5. Now, the top 5, number 5, is Eddington. And this film has stuck with me throughout the year. I think I was one of the first or only reviewers to really kind of say, I think this is quite a radical, groundbreaking, cult classic piece of virtuoso filmmaking. I liked his first film, Hereditary. I liked Midsommar. I didn't like Beau is Afraid. And my fear going into this, partly because Joaquin Phoenix is in there, was, is this going to be a bit more of a Beau is Afraid? I really liked it when I came out. And I noticed that a lot of reviewers who'd been quite harsh about it in their first reviews have kind of come back to this film in their kind of end-of-year list saying, actually, maybe we got this wrong. Maybe we were too harsh with this. It's chaotic. It's a film that really mirrors the conspiracy theory laden, and yet I say that knowing that many conspiracy theories are facts, and that the state and the system is encouraging us to think they're conspiracy theories so that we shut up or marginalize people who have alternative opinions. It speaks to all of that. It's part of what I call this new paranoiac genre of filmmaking, where we live in an age where truth and who we are and what we are and how we navigate ourselves and stay true to ourselves in a very untrustworthy multimedia landscape. How do we hold true to what we are and who we are? Well, I think this, for me, kind of a grab that I use for it when I'm recommending it to people is think Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, but park that isolated, dysfunctional, kind of feels like he's on a mission from God type thing of Travis Bickle, the taxi driver played by Robert De Niro, and Parker in the sheriff of Eddington. This film, in the final 35 to 45 minutes, the final act is true gonzo madness. Asthma, pumps, heads blowing off, violence, lunacy, huge sudden disabilities. It's just quite an astonishing watch. And the more I think about this film, the more I think it's a work of quiet, crazy genius. Number 4, this is, you see, it was a film where we were promised so much from our horror films. Weapons, we're going to get excited about that. It was from the guy who did Barbarian. There was that we were going to get excited about. Bring Her Back. Oh my God, the next film from Talk to Me. What not to possibly like there? But actually, of all the horror films that came out this year, the one that really stuck with me was Together, the supernatural body horror film. Directed by Michael Shanks, who I think is another kind of Aussie YouTuber, starring Dave Franco, acting alongside his real-life wife, Alison Brie. And this is a horror of codependency, and I think that in and of itself is enough to say, wow, you know, it's hard to find horror films that aren't riffing on the same old tired kind of haunted house, you know, paranormal, monster, demonic, poltergeist. Do you know what I mean? There's always the kind of, you know, slasher, fucking lunatic and all that kind of stuff. This was very different. This was about codependency. This is about a couple. And okay, albeit that what triggers the issue of them fusing together in love is something that they encounter in a cavern. I just thought this was an incredibly effective film that knew exactly when to step towards the comedy, but also managed to keep a really tight hold on the genuine body horror. Sometimes people talk of body horror and it's just, what is body horror? It's just seeing body parts destroyed and seeing it in extreme close-up. But this was different. This was a contorted kind of body horror that I think David Cronenberg should look to and take some lessons from, because his more later films are becoming quite sort of dry in their storytelling. Dave Franco was brilliant. Alison Brie was brilliant. The strength, the intimacy of their performance was great. And if you've got a horror film that manages to turn a Spice Girls classic into almost an anthem of body horror doom, full credit to you. So for me, Together is number 4, and Together really is for me the horror film of 2025. Number 3, my review's only just gone out. This is Marty Supreme. Yes, many say a revisit of Uncut Gems with a happy ending. Check out my review. I think it's far from a happy ending, actually. It's not an obviously unhappy ending, as in Uncut Gems. This is the film starring Timothée Chalamet as the, it's loosely biopic sort of film about a real-life player, Marty Mauser, who was a sensational table tennis player. This is a warts and all, adrenaline-fueled, cocaine, there's no cocaine in it, but fuck me, if you took cocaine watching it, your brain might explode. It's urgent, it's fast, it's furious. It has a similar pace to another film that was released this year, One Battle After Another, and it maintains it relentlessly all the way through. Timothée Chalamet is sensational. There is the danger that perhaps for many people, the speed with which it trots along, the deviations it takes, the distractions, it's like a film made by ADHD people for ADHD people about ADHD people. It goes which way and everywhere. Fabulous turn by Gwyneth Paltrow. Timothée Chalamet gives it everything, and every single support actor in it is just brilliantly authentic and gritty and real. Josh Safdie, the director, just brings a really grainy, granular, inventive and urgent sort of approach to another character portrait, which is really a portrait of someone's hubris. He destroys himself in his attempt to be successful, despite the fact he has all the fucking keys to be very successful, but he is the master of his own demise. And really you relish and you watch behind sort of wincing eyes as his life and everything around him implodes massively. Number 3, Marty Supreme. My second best film of the year is Bugonia. This is the Yorgos Lanthimos film. Now, this was a real shocker and a real surprise for me because I loved Poor Things. I think that might have been my film of the year when that came out. I despised Kinds of Kindness, and he was working with the same creative team, essentially, certainly in front of camera, in the form of Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. I love this film. This film is batshit fucking crazy, and for me, it sits alongside Eddington, and it also sits alongside One Battle After Another as another film about a paranoiac age. We don't know where certainty lies. It pivots around Jesse Plemons believing that Emma Stone, the CEO of this company, is an alien. She's possessed. They've been sent to this planet to kind of conquer us or transform us. And he believes in conspiracy theory fashion that she's a kind of lizard person and all that kind of stuff. So it heads towards the crackpot conspiracy theory stuff. And then in an about turn, spoiler reviews these are, I'm afraid, in an about turn, there's a moment of reveal in the middle of this film, or towards the end of this film, where you're aghast, and you're gasping at the fact that the reveal twists you out of all of your assumptions. So it's a brilliant two-header, principally. Jesse Plemons as this deranged, driven, tragic, sweaty, petrifying lunatic who's just fervent in his belief that she is an alien, and he takes her. They basically take her hostage. He's aided by his cousin, is it, or his nephew, played by Aidan Delbis, who is an actor who is an autistic actor. He has autism and plays an autistic character. And there's a kind of almost Of Mice and Men tragedy around his character. But Emma Stone does a brilliant job of playing the many different levels of deceit, or not deceit, masking, pretending, hiding. Is she an alien? Isn't she an alien? Is Jesse Plemons right? And when you find out towards the end of the film what the situation is, it makes you reflect on whether, is Jesse Plemons actually as mad as he came across, given that he was right? Or was he still fucking insane, even though he was right? And is she still wrong, even though she was something else, and all this kind of stuff? The final scene, the final moment in the film, where, again, spoiler, the final moment in the film where something cataclysmic happens to humans on Earth, was almost like an extended art installation of such magnificence and such shocking strength in the year that we've had the interstellar object hurtling through space. It's been a year of really wondering, I think, for some of us anyway, about what our meaning is, what the greater meaning of life in the universe is all about. And this film really kind of steps towards that. And once again, like Eddington, screams at us, don't think you know everything. Because actually, once you feel you know something, the complete opposite might be the truth. And, be careful when you characterize any conspiracy theorist, as I have in the past, as a nutcase, because actually they might be right and they might be onto something. And I think it really, again, speaks to that confused idea of what's fake news, what's truth, what's not truth in real life. And it was stylistically sensational. The color grade, the performances, the curiosity of things like even the cop that almost kind of finds Jesse Plemons, reveals that Jesse Plemons has got Emma Stone kidnapped. The fact that he was the abuser, or he abused pedophilically Jesse Plemons when Jesse Plemons was a kid. Just certain details in this film that are so astonishing. It's you don't often get a film that just kind of goes, wow, this is a new form of sort of storytelling. This did it. Eddington did it. And as we move to film number 1 of the year, I think it has to be the film that when one stepped out of the cinema, one literally ran with a skip in one step, turned to everyone you were with and went, wow, how fucking amazing was that? And that film is, of course, One Battle After Another. One Battle After Another is, of course, the film starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Regina Hall, Teyana Taylor, Chase Infinity, Paul Thomas Anderson directed. Again, loosely based on a Thomas Pynchon novel. I think Inherent Vice, another film by Paul Thomas Anderson, was also a Pynchon novel. Pynchon novels are inherently and of themselves, because so many drugs appear to have been taken in the sort of, not only the writing of them, but by all the characters in them. The paranoia, again, features everywhere. And the paranoia in this film is helped by the fact that you have essentially a group of Antifa-like, though Antifa doesn't exist, but how they would want us to think Antifa exists, and a group of Antifa-like characters trying to subvert and upset the mainstream in America. It tickles at the edges of the immigrant-migrant issue that is running and threaded through Donald Trump's America at the moment. It's very much a sort of post-Trump American film. And I have to say, like the other two films, Eddington and Bugonia, this film really just made one feel on edge, stressed, like one was being watched all the time. The idea that there is a system that needs to be unpicked and kind of got beneath. Leonardo DiCaprio was just brilliant as a hapless, urgent, slightly stoned, clueless kind of character caught up in this madness. Benicio del Toro as the kind of sensei who's just kind of, peace and love and just very calm, but also part of the resistance. This is about resistance. This is about fighting oppression. It was kind of like a Che Guevara kind of rah, rah, rah type thing, which makes it frustrating when you know that Leonardo DiCaprio is investing heavily in Israel, in property. You sort of think, well, do you know what resistance really is? So parking that to the side just for a moment. Sean Penn, absolutely sensational turn. He has to be nominated for an Oscar as the creepy, isn't he, the dad of Chase Infinity? We presume he is. We look at kind of Masonic kind of characters in control of everyone, and Sean Penn's comes to an odd end. Everything about it was chaotic, it was stressful, it was driven, it was fast. If you watch this and Marty Supreme in a double bill, your brain and your eyeballs will more than likely absolutely explode. As an all-round piece of entertainment, stimulating storytelling, edge of your seat, exciting watch, one battle after another, absolutely closed the deal this year in terms of being my #1 film of the year. On that note, just some notable mentions for the end of this. Roofman, didn't review it, but watched it over the Christmas period. Channing Tatum, fully recommend it, highly recommend it, incredibly moving, entertaining. Channing Tatum really proving himself to be quite a sensational actor there, about the true story of a man who hid in a Toys R Us and tried to kind of reignite a normal family life, falling in love with a woman, having escaped from prison several times. An amazing portrait of an amazing character. And it's great when Hollywood turns towards characters who are of dubious kind of legality, if you like, because he was a criminal, but also he was a criminal with a heart. No One Is One Thing. Roofman, would recommend it. Companion was the other kind of film that was kind of close to a horror. It was an AI piece. Companion. It starred Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid. She plays a sort of love bot. I'm reading a book called Annie Bot, which is about a love bot, and it was just a really clever film. I found it very entertaining, very inventive film about a female sex bot, essentially, who begins to discover what she's been designed for and is unsatisfied or dissatisfied with that and seeks to escape and has the wool pulled from before her eyes as to the nature of her partner, Jack Quaid. So I think we're going to get more films like this from the POV of AI, who are essentially taken advantage of or exploited by humans for sexual ends. The Surfer, gonzo piece of filmmaking with Nick Cage, kind of harked back to an era of Australian outbacky kind of films. Was there a film called Kangaroo with Donald Pleasance? Really weird, hallucinogenic, strange, druggy, spliffy, paranoiac again, with Nick Cage kind of working out whether he's seen a crime as part of a crime. He's on a beach. Again, slightly interested in that sort of invisible man of a certain age striving to make sense of his life. I thought it was an incredibly innovative, original and refreshingly strange watch, with moments of great surrealism and oddity within it. Sorry Baby was a film that I saw later in the year. I actually saw it around the time that my mum was very unwell. This was a sort of black comedy directed by Eva Victor, and it was really, the best grab on this is, it's a very counterintuitive black comedy. It is, but a comedy actually about a young woman who is essentially sexually assaulted by her professor, and a film that speaks to the idea that actually trauma, sexual assault trauma, can manifest in very many different ways. Some of them not the most obvious, of kind of depression or sadness or negativity. You can go about other normal kind of activities, getting jobs, doing jobs, writing, striking up new relationships, having almost a kind of almost gallows humor about your own life, and yet you're still the victim of trauma. And I thought Sorry Baby was a really unique and interesting and gentle and very lightly funny and thought-provoking film about the different ways in which trauma can present. We often talk about how grief can present in very different ways for people. Well, trauma is a form of grief, isn't it? It's grief around something that's happened to you. And this film played by, and the character in this film, played by Eva Victor, who also directed it, is a really complex, interesting character portrait to follow. And finally, as a notable mention, Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Main reason for this being, I haven't seen a Del Toro film in years that I've thought, oh wow, that's so good. I must make sure that I kind of see something else by him. This was the first one. I loved the first act of this. It's very high camp. It's very high drama. Jacob Elordi is the monster. Oscar Isaac is Dr. Frankenstein. It's very ornate. It's very sort of, some could argue it's a bit Netflixy insofar as it's kind of CGI and all that, but Guillermo del Toro, it's kind of proper fairy tale stuff. I adored the first act. It was like Shackleton's Adventures in the Arctic. I thought the monster was good. I thought the relationship between the monster and Dr. Frankenstein was good. I thought the idea of who was more monstrous, the monster or the creator of the monster, was dealt with really well. I thought it was a classical interpretation. It was brilliantly executed. You've got Christoph Waltz in there too. He's got syphilis, which is always a good detail, isn't it? Christoph Waltz with syphilis is always a good thing in a film. I just found it a really escapist and thought-provoking fairy tale-like portrait of a classic story, Frankenstein. And now I'd just like to pay reference to Nenad, a dear friend of mine who's a huge movie fan from Berlin. His number one was Superman. I can see why. Thunderbolts was on his top 10. Didn't do anything for me, Thunderbolts. It's not my worst films, but it didn't rock the boat for me. John Candy, documentary, I believe. I haven't seen that. One Battle After Another is on there, so we agree on that too. Ballerina, you liked, which was the John Wick spin-off, I think. The Smashing Machine, you liked. It didn't do it for me. I much preferred Marty Supreme. Blood and Sinners, I don't know. September the 5th, I haven't seen. Frankenstein's on there too, Nenad. I'm very pleased to see that. And Mr. Scorsese, fantastic, the documentary about Scorsese's life. Yeah, I really want to see that too. I've got a book about Scorsese and faith this Christmas. So guys, see if you agree with any of Nenad's, see if you agree with any of mine. Tell me what your top 10 or top 5 films were for this year, and on a separate upload I will be doing the worst films, the biggest disappointments of 2025.